The wind howled like a pack of wolves as Katherine Winters stumbled through the snow, her thin dress soaked through and clinging to her swollen belly. She had been walking for hours since her mother-in-law, Agnes Winters, had shoved her out the door of the ranch house with nothing but the clothes on her back and her dead husband's wedding ring still on her finger. The blizzard had come out of nowhere, unusual even for the Texas Panhandle in February of 1883, and Catherine knew she would not survive the night if she did not find shelter soon. Her teeth chattered so violently she bit her tongue, tasting copper blood as she pressed forward through drifts that reached her knees. She was 7 months pregnant, widowed for only 3 weeks, and now cast out like garbage because Agnes had decided the baby was not really her son's child, a cruel lie born from grief and spite. Catherine's husband, Thomas Winters, had been thrown from a horse and broke his neck on a fence post. One moment he was alive and laughing. The next he was gone, leaving Catherine alone with his bitter, grieving mother, who had never truly accepted her as part of the family. Agnes had tolerated Catherine while Thomas lived, but the moment he died, that thin veneer of civility cracked and shattered. 3 days ago, Agnes had started with small accusations, questioning whether Catherine had been faithful, suggesting the baby might not be Thomas's, despite Catherine never having been alone with another man. This morning, Agnes had worked herself into a rage, screaming that Catherine was a whore and a liar, that she would not support another man's bastard under her roof. When Catherine had tried to defend herself, Agnes had physically dragged her to the door and thrown her out into the storm. The snow was falling so thick now that Catherine could barely see 3 feet ahead. Her hands were numb, her face felt frozen, and the baby inside her belly had stopped moving. Panic seized her chest. She needed warmth. She needed help. The road had disappeared under the white blanket, and she had no idea which direction led to town or safety. Every step felt like walking through molasses, her body growing heavier and slower. She thought of her baby, her precious child who would never know its father, and a sob tore from her throat. She would not let them both die here. She refused. Through the curtain of snow, a dim light flickered in the distance. Catherine's heart leaped. She changed direction, fighting toward that golden beacon with every ounce of strength left in her body. The light grew larger, and she could make out the shape of a small cabin, smoke rising from a stone chimney. Relief flooded through her so powerfully her knees nearly buckled. She pushed forward, her frozen fingers reaching for the rough wooden door. She tried to knock, but her hand would not obey properly, only managing a weak scraping sound against the wood. Darkness crept at the edges of her vision. She slumped against the door frame, her body finally giving up the fight. The door opened suddenly, and Catherine fell forward. Strong arms caught her before she hit the ground, and she found herself staring up into a face that seemed carved from granite, with storm-gray eyes that widened in shock. The man was tall and broad-shouldered, dressed in worn denims and a flannel shirt, his dark hair slightly too long and curling at his collar. He looked to be in his late 20s, with a strong jaw, covered in several days' worth of stubble. "Good Lord," the man breathed, his voice deep and rough like gravel. He scooped Catherine up as though she weighed nothing, kicking the door shut behind him and carrying her to a chair near the blazing fireplace. "Madam, can you hear me? What in God's name are you doing out in this storm?" Catherine tried to speak, but her mouth would not form words. Her whole body was shaking violently. The man disappeared for a moment and returned with heavy wool blankets, wrapping them around her with surprising gentleness for such large, calloused hands. He knelt in front of her, rubbing her frozen hands between his own, trying to restore circulation. "We need to warm you up slow," he said, his brow furrowed with concern. "Too fast and it will hurt worse. Can you tell me your name?" "K. Catherine," she managed through chattering teeth. "W. Winters." His eyes dropped to her swollen belly, and his expression shifted to something between alarm and determination. "You are with child. How far along?" 7 months. "Jesus." He stood and moved to the stove, pouring something hot into a tin cup. He returned and held it to her lips. Drink this. Small sips. It is just warm water with a bit of honey. Nothing that will upset your stomach. Catherine sipped obediently, the liquid burning pleasantly down her frozen throat. As feeling began to return to her extremities, she started to cry, great heaving sobs that shook her whole body. The man set the cup aside and simply stayed there, kneeling beside her chair, his presence solid and steady. "You are safe now?" he said quietly. "I am Caleb Harrison. This is my cabin. You are about 8 miles north of Fort Worth, Texas. Can you tell me what happened?" Through her tears, Catherine told him everything. She told him about Thomas's death, about Agnes's accusations, about being thrown out into the storm with nothing. Caleb's jaw tightened as she spoke, a muscle ticking in his cheek, but he let her finish without interruption. "Your mother-in-law is a fool," he said flatly when she was done, "and a cruel one at that. You will stay here tonight. The storm should pass by morning, and then we can figure out what to do." "I have nowhere to go," Catherine whispered. "No money, no family, just this baby." Caleb stood and ran a hand through his hair, clearly thinking. The cabin was small but tidy, with a single room that served as kitchen, living space, and bedroom. A simple cot stood against one wall, a table and 2 chairs near the window, and shelves lined with books and supplies. It was a bachelor's home, functional and sparse, but clean and well-maintained. "You can stay here," Caleb said finally, "until after the baby comes at least. Give you time to figure things out." Catherine stared at him. "You do not even know me." "I know you are a woman in need, pregnant and alone in a blizzard. That is enough." He met her eyes steadily. "I will not send you back out there to die, Mrs. Winters. I am not that kind of man." Something in his tone made Catherine believe him. She nodded slowly, fresh tears spilling down her cheeks, but these were tears of relief and gratitude. "Thank you," she whispered. "I will work to earn my keep. I can cook and clean and mend. I will not be a burden." "You are not a burden," Caleb said firmly. "You are a person who needs help. Now you need to get out of those wet clothes before you catch your death. I will turn my back and you can change into something dry. I have some old shirts that should fit over your belly." He was true to his word. Turning to face the wall, while Catherine stripped off her frozen dress with numb, fumbling fingers, he handed her a large flannel shirt and a pair of his trousers, which she managed to pull on, though they were far too big in the waist. She had to hold them up with one hand. When she told him she was decent, he turned back and surveyed her with a slight quirk of his lips that might have been the start of a smile. "I have some rope we can use as a belt," he said. He found a length of thin rope and helped her fashion a makeshift belt, his movements careful and respectful, never touching her more than necessary. "There. Now you need food. When did you last eat?" Catherine had to think. "Yesterday morning, I think. Agnes had stopped giving me meals the last few days." Caleb's expression darkened, but he said nothing, simply moving to the stove where a pot was simmering. He ladled out a bowl of stew, thick with meat and vegetables, and brought it to her with a chunk of bread. Catherine ate ravenously, not caring about manners, and Caleb watched with satisfaction. "Good," he said. "You need to keep your strength up for that baby." As Catherine ate, she studied her rescuer. Caleb Harrison had the weathered look of a man who spent most of his time outdoors, with sun creases at the corners of his eyes and hands scarred from hard work. He moved with the easy confidence of someone comfortable in his own skin, and there was a quiet competence about him that made Catherine feel safe for the first time in weeks. "Do you run cattle?" she asked between bites. "Some. Mostly I break and train horses. I have a small corral out back and about 20 acres of grazing land. It is not much, but it is mine." There was pride in his voice. "I have been saving up to expand, maybe buy some of the land adjacent to mine. The previous owner died last year, and his widow is looking to sell. It sounds like good work." "It is honest work." Caleb poured himself a cup of coffee and sat down at the table. I grew up on a ranch in Colorado, worked there until my father died 5 years ago. My older brother inherited everything, and we did not see eye to eye on much, so I took my share of the money and came to Texas to start fresh. Been here 3 years now. Catherine finished her stew and set the bowl aside, pulling the blankets tighter around herself. The warmth of the fire and the food in her belly were making her drowsy, her body finally relaxing after hours of terror and exertion. Caleb noticed and stood. "You should sleep," he said. "Take the bed. I will make a pallet on the floor." "I cannot take your bed," Catherine protested weakly. "You can and you will. You are pregnant and half frozen. I have slept on worse than a floor, believe me." His tone left no room for argument. He gathered some blankets and made himself a bedroll near the fire, while Catherine climbed into the narrow cot. The mattress was thin, but the blankets were warm and clean, and Catherine sank into them with a sigh of relief. "Mr. Harrison," she said quietly into the darkness. "Caleb," he corrected from his spot on the floor. "Caleb, thank you for everything." "Sleep, Catherine. We will talk more in the morning." Catherine closed her eyes and, despite everything that had happened, fell asleep almost immediately, lulled by the crackling of the fire and the steady sound of Caleb's breathing. She woke the next morning to pale sunlight streaming through the window and the smell of coffee and bacon. Her body ached everywhere, and when she tried to sit up, she gasped at the stiffness in her muscles. Caleb appeared beside the bed immediately, his hair damp as though he had already been outside. "Easy," he said, helping her sit up. "You are going to be sore for a few days. You pushed yourself hard yesterday." "The baby," Catherine said, placing her hands on her belly. To her relief, she felt movement, a strong kick against her palm. "It is moving again. I was so afraid last night when it stopped." "That is good. That is very good." Caleb handed her a cup of coffee, sweetened with honey the way she liked it, though she had never told him. He must have noticed last night. "The storm passed. There is about 2 feet of snow on the ground, but the sky is clear. I need to check on my horses and make sure they have food and water. Will you be all right here for a bit?" "Yes, of course. I can clean up the breakfast dishes." "Only if you feel up to it. Do not push yourself too hard." He pulled on a heavy coat and hat, then paused at the door. "Catherine, I meant what I said last night. You are welcome to stay here as long as you need. I know you do not know me, and you have no reason to trust me, but I give you my word I will not harm you or take advantage. I just want to help." Catherine looked at him, at his honest gray eyes and earnest expression, and something in her chest tightened. This man, this stranger, was offering her more kindness than her own family had shown her. "I believe you," she said softly. "And I am grateful." Caleb nodded and headed out into the snow. Catherine sipped her coffee and looked around the cabin in the daylight. It was even smaller than she had realized, maybe 15 feet by 20 feet at most. The walls were rough-hewn logs, chinked with mud and moss, the floor packed dirt, covered in places with rag rugs. There was one window with real glass, a luxury in these parts, and the door fit snugly in its frame with no gaps for wind. Everything spoke of a man who took care of what he owned, who might not have much but maintained it well. Catherine washed the breakfast dishes in a basin of water heated on the stove, moving slowly and carefully. Her belly felt heavier than usual, and she wondered if the stress of yesterday had affected the baby. She dried the dishes and put them away, then swept the floor, finding a strange comfort in these simple domestic tasks. For the first time since Thomas died, she felt useful rather than like a burden to be tolerated. Caleb returned an hour later, his cheeks red from the cold, carrying an armload of firewood. He stamped the snow off his boots and stacked the wood neatly by the fireplace. "All the horses are fine," he reported. "I have 6 in the corral right now that I am working with, plus my own 2. One of them is due to be picked up next week, which will give me some cash to work with." "How much do you charge?" Catherine asked, curious. "Depends on the horse and what needs to be done. anywhere from $20 to $50 for a full breaking and training. Some people bring me horses that have been mistreated, and those take longer. Others just need basic saddle training. That is good money. It is when the work is steady. Winter is always harder. People do not want to travel in the snow to bring me horses, and I cannot do as much outdoor work. But I manage. He hung his coat on a peg by the door. How are you feeling this morning? Sore, but better. The baby is moving again, which makes me feel better. That is good. Caleb moved to the stove and poured himself more coffee. I have been thinking about your situation. You said you have no family? None living. My parents died of fever when I was 16. I was working as a seamstress in Fort Worth when I met Thomas. We married 6 months later. And your husband's mother is the only family he had? He had a brother, but he moved to California 3 years ago. They were not close. Agnes was all that was left. Katherine wrapped her hands around her coffee cup. I thought about trying to find his brother, but I have no money for a train ticket, and I do not even know exactly where in California he is. Caleb sat down across from her, his expression thoughtful. Here is what I'm thinking. You stay here until after the baby is born. You can help with cooking and keeping the place tidy, whatever you feel up to doing. I will provide food and shelter. After the baby comes and you have recovered your strength, we can figure out a longer-term plan. Maybe you can find work in town, or maybe we can track down your brother-in-law. But for now, you and the baby just need to be safe and healthy. You would do that? Let me stay here for months? I would. I am gone most days working with the horses, so you would have the cabin to yourself. Evenings I am usually here, and I can help with anything you need. It is not a perfect arrangement, but it is better than you being alone on the streets or at the mercy of your mother-in-law. Katherine felt tears prick her eyes again. She seemed to cry at everything these days. I do not know how to repay you. You do not need to repay me. Just take care of yourself and that baby. That is payment enough. Caleb stood and moved to the shelves, pulling down a book. I usually read in the evenings. Do you like to read? I do, though I have not had much chance lately. Well, you have plenty of chance now. I have maybe 30 books here. Help yourself to any of them. Katherine smiled, the first genuine smile she had managed in weeks. Thank you, Caleb. Truly. The days settled into a routine. Caleb rose early and went out to work with his horses, coming back at midday for lunch and then again in the evening for supper. Katherine cooked meals from the supplies in the cabin, simple fare of beans and bacon and cornbread, occasionally a stew or roasted chicken when Caleb brought one home from town. She kept the cabin clean and mended Caleb's clothes, which had an impressive collection of tears and missing buttons. She read his books, discovering he had eclectic taste, ranging from adventure novels to farming manuals to poetry. In the evenings, they would sit by the fire and talk. Caleb was not a talkative man by nature, but he opened up slowly, telling Katherine about growing up in Colorado, about his difficult relationship with his older brother, about his dreams of building a successful horse training business. Katherine told him about her own childhood, about learning to sew from her mother, about meeting Thomas at a church social and thinking he was the most handsome man she had ever seen. He was good to me, Katherine said one night, about 3 weeks after she had arrived. Thomas was kind and gentle, and he made me laugh. I truly loved him. I am sure you did, Caleb said quietly. He was whittling a piece of wood, his hands moving with practiced ease. It is a tragedy that he died so young. He should have been here to see his child born. Agnes said terrible things, but Thomas was the father. I was never with anyone else. I would not have done that to him. I know, Caleb said, and the simple certainty in his voice made Katherine's throat tighten with emotion. How do you know? You barely know me. Caleb looked up from his whittling, his gray eyes meeting hers across the firelight. I am a good judge of character. It is part of what makes me good with horses. You have to be able to read them, understand what they are thinking and feeling. People are not so different. You are honest, Catherine. It shows in everything you do and say. Your mother-in-law was wrong about you. Catherine looked away, overwhelmed by the faith this near stranger had in her. I hope my baby has your sense of people. It would serve them well in life. I hope your baby has your strength. You walked through a blizzard pregnant rather than give up. That takes courage. They fell into comfortable silence, the only sounds the crackling of the fire and the whisper of Caleb's knife against wood. Catherine picked up her sewing, working on a tiny gown she was making for the baby from scraps of fabric Caleb had brought back from town. He had also bought cotton for diapers and a soft wool blanket, claiming he had got them cheap at the general store, though Catherine suspected he had paid full price. He was careful of her pride, always finding ways to help that did not feel like charity. As February turned into March, the snow melted and the first green shoots of spring began to appear. Catherine's belly grew rounder and heavier, and she moved more slowly, her back aching constantly. Caleb began insisting she rest more, taking over the cooking some evenings when he came in and found her looking particularly tired. He was surprisingly competent in the kitchen, making decent biscuits and a beef stew that was actually quite good. My mother insisted all her sons learn to cook, he explained when Catherine complimented his stew. She said she did not raise helpless men who would starve without a woman to tend them. Your mother sounds like a wise woman. She was. A shadow passed over Caleb's face. She died when I was 17. Consumption. Took her slow and hard. I am sorry. It was a long time ago. But Catherine could hear the grief still buried in his voice, and she understood. Some losses never fully healed. One evening in mid-March, Catherine was washing dishes when a sharp pain lanced through her belly. She gasped and gripped the edge of the table, breathing through it. The pain faded after a moment, and she straightened carefully, probably just the baby moving. But 20 minutes later it happened again, stronger this time, and Catherine realized with a jolt of fear and excitement that these were contractions. Caleb, she called, trying to keep her voice steady. He was outside, tending the horses. Caleb! He came running, bursting through the door with alarm on his face. What is wrong? The baby, it is coming. Caleb's face went pale. Now? But you are not due for another month. I know, but babies come when they want to come. Another contraction gripped her and she bent over, panting. We need to get the midwife from town. That is 8 miles. It will take me over an hour to ride there and back, and that is if I can find her immediately. Caleb ran his hands through his hair, clearly panicking. What if the baby comes while I am gone? Then you will need to deliver it. Catherine tried to smile, but it came out as more of a grimace. Women have been having babies for thousands of years, Caleb. We will manage. I have never delivered a baby in my life. I have delivered foals, but that is not the same thing. It is probably more similar than you think. Catherine moved to the bed and sat down heavily. But please, try to get the midwife. I would feel better with someone experienced here. Right, yes, I will go now. Caleb grabbed his coat and hat, then paused. Will you be all right alone? I will be fine. First babies take a long time. Go. Caleb left at a run, and Catherine heard him shouting to his horse, the sound of hoofbeats pounding away into the distance. She lay back on the bed and tried to relax between contractions, breathing the way her mother had told her to breathe years ago when Catherine had asked about childbirth. The contractions were still far apart, maybe 15 minutes, so she had time. Probably. An hour passed. Then 2. The contractions grew closer together and stronger. Catherine paced the cabin, pausing to lean against the table or wall when a contraction hit. She had a fire going and water heating on the stove, remembering vaguely that hot water was important for childbirth, though she was not entirely sure why. She had gathered all the clean cloths she could find and laid them on the bed. 3 hours after Caleb had left, the door burst open and he came in, breathing hard, followed by a stout woman in her 50s with iron gray hair and a capable expression. The midwife carried a large black bag and moved with the brisk efficiency of someone who had done this many times before. "I am Mrs. Abigail Fletcher," the woman said, setting her bag on the table and rolling up her sleeves. "How far apart are your contractions, dear?" "About 5 minutes," Catherine gasped in the grip of another one. "Good, we have time, but not a lot of it. Mr. Harrison, I need you to keep that fire going and make sure we have plenty of hot water. Other than that, stay out of the way." Caleb nodded and retreated to the fireplace, looking relieved to have someone else in charge. "Mrs. Fletcher examined Catherine with gentle, practiced hands, asking questions about when the contraction started and whether her water had broken. Catherine answered as best she could between contractions, which were coming faster now and lasting longer. "You are doing fine, dear," Mrs. Fletcher said. "The baby is in a good position. You just need to keep breathing and let your body do its work." The next few hours were a blur of pain and effort. Catherine had known childbirth would be difficult, but nothing had truly prepared her for the reality of it. She cried and screamed and cursed, gripping Mrs. Fletcher's hand so hard she was sure she would leave bruises. Through it all, she was aware of Caleb hovering nearby, his face tight with worry, bringing whatever Mrs. Fletcher needed without being asked, murmuring encouragement when Catherine looked at him with wild, frightened eyes. "I cannot do this," Catherine sobbed at one point, exhausted and terrified. "It is too much." "You can," Caleb said firmly, kneeling beside the bed and taking her hand. "You are the strongest person I know, Catherine. You walked through a blizzard to save this baby. You can do this." His words, his absolute faith in her, gave Catherine something to hold on to. She bore down with the next contraction, pushing with everything she had. Mrs. Fletcher coached her through it, telling her when to push and when to breathe, and finally, just as Catherine thought she could not take any more, she felt a sudden release and heard the most beautiful sound in the world. A baby's cry. "It is a boy," Mrs. Fletcher announced, holding up a tiny, red-faced infant who was wailing indignantly at being thrust into the cold world. "A healthy baby boy." Catherine burst into tears, reaching for her son. Mrs. Fletcher cleaned the baby quickly and wrapped him in the soft wool blanket Caleb had bought, then placed him in Catherine's arms. He was so small, his eyes squinted shut, his little fists waving in the air. Catherine counted his fingers and toes, examined his perfect tiny nose and the dark fuzz of hair on his head, and fell completely in love. "Hello, my darling," she whispered. "I am your mama. I am so glad you are here." She looked up to find Caleb staring at the baby with an expression of such wonder and tenderness it made her chest ache. "Do you want to hold him?" she asked softly. "I could not. I have never held a baby. There is a first time for everything." Catherine held the baby out, and after a moment's hesitation, Caleb took him, cradling the tiny body against his broad chest with surprising gentleness. The baby stopped crying and opened his eyes, dark blue and unfocused, looking up at Caleb's face. "He is so small," Caleb breathed. "I had no idea babies were this small." "He is actually a good size for coming early," Mrs. Fletcher said, bustling around cleaning up. "I would guess around 6 pounds. You did well, Catherine. You and the baby are both healthy." Catherine felt exhaustion crashing over her like a wave. She could barely keep her eyes open. Mrs. Fletcher noticed and shooed Caleb away, taking the baby and placing him in a makeshift cradle Caleb had fashioned from a wooden box and soft blankets. She helped Catherine into a clean nightgown and changed the bedding, then tucked her in firmly. "You need rest," the midwife said. "The baby will likely sleep for a few hours, and then he will want to eat. Mr. Harrison knows how to reach me if you need anything, but I think you will do just fine. You are a natural." "Thank you," Catherine said sleepily, "for everything." Mrs. Fletcher patted her hand and then moved to speak quietly with Caleb by the door. Catherine heard the clink of coins and Mrs. Fletcher protesting that it was too much, but Caleb insisted. Then the door closed, and it was just the three of them: Catherine, Caleb, and the baby. Caleb approached the bed quietly. "How are you feeling?" "Tired, sore, happy." Catherine smiled up at him. "Thank you for getting Mrs. Fletcher, and for staying. I know it could not have been easy for you. I would not have been anywhere else." Caleb glanced at the baby, sleeping peacefully in his cradle. "Have you thought of a name?" Catherine had thought about it quite a bit over the past weeks. "I want to name him after his father, Thomas, but I would like to give him a second name too, if that is all right." "It is your son. You can name him whatever you want." "I would like to name him Thomas Caleb Winters, after his father and the man who saved us both." Caleb's eyes widened. "Catherine, you do not have to do that." "I want to. You gave us shelter when we had nowhere to go. You have been nothing but kind and generous. I want my son to carry your name, to remember what you did for us." Caleb looked away, but not before Catherine saw his eyes glisten with emotion. "I am honored," he said quietly. "Truly. Good. Then it is settled. Thomas Caleb Winters." The baby woke a few hours later, crying lustily, and Catherine nursed him with Mrs. Fletcher's instructions echoing in her head. It was awkward at first and painful, but she figured it out with Caleb's help, his face red with embarrassment, but his hands steady as he adjusted pillows and fetched water. They muddled through together, learning as they went, and by the end of the first week, Catherine felt like she was beginning to understand how to care for her son. Caleb was wonderful with the baby, patient and gentle despite his initial nervousness. He held Thomas while Catherine ate or bathed, rocking him when he cried, changing his diapers without complaint. He sang to the baby in a low, rumbling voice, mostly old cowboy songs about riding the range and rounding up cattle, and Thomas seemed to find it soothing. Catherine would watch them together and feel her heart swell with affection for this man who had taken in a desperate, pregnant stranger and treated her with nothing but kindness. As the weeks passed and spring bloomed across the Texas prairie, Catherine regained her strength. She resumed cooking and cleaning, though Caleb insisted she not push herself too hard. Thomas grew rapidly, filling out and becoming more alert, his eyes tracking movement and his fists grabbing at anything within reach. Catherine had never been happier, despite the uncertainty of her future. One evening in late April, after Thomas had been fed and was sleeping peacefully, Catherine and Caleb sat outside on the cabin's small porch, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of orange and pink. The air was warm and sweet with the scent of wildflowers, and somewhere in the distance, a coyote howled. "I have been thinking," Caleb said, breaking the comfortable silence, "about your situation." Catherine's stomach clenched. She had been dreading this conversation, knowing it would come eventually. "You want us to leave?" "What?" "No." Caleb turned to look at her, surprise on his face. "That is not what I was going to say at all. I was going to say that I have been thinking about asking you to stay. Permanently." Catherine's heart skipped a beat. "Permanently?" "I know it is not a conventional arrangement. People in town will talk, a single man and a widow with a baby living together. But I do not care much what people think, and I would like you and Thomas to stay. This place feels more like a home with you here. I would miss you both if you left." "I would miss you too," Catherine admitted. "More than I should, probably." "Why should you not miss me?" Caleb asked, turning to face her fully. "Catherine, these past months, getting to know you, watching you with Thomas, it has made me realize how lonely I was before. I like having you here. I like talking to you in the evenings and hearing you sing to the baby when you think I am not listening. I like coming home and finding you here. I know you are still grieving your husband, and I am not trying to replace him, but I hope that maybe in time we could become more than just housemates." Catherine's breath caught. She had been trying so hard not to acknowledge her growing feelings for Caleb, feeling guilty for even noticing how handsome he was, how kind, how much she looked forward to his return each evening. It felt like a betrayal of Thomas's memory, but Thomas had been gone for 4 months now, and while Catherine still mourned him, she could not deny that her feelings for Caleb were becoming harder to ignore. I have been feeling the same way, she confessed, but I did not know if it was right. Thomas only died a few months ago. Is it wrong to have feelings for someone else so soon? I cannot answer that for you, Caleb said gently. But I can tell you that I do not think Thomas would have wanted you to be alone and miserable for the rest of your life. From what you have told me about him, he was a good man who loved you. Good men want the people they love to be happy, even if they cannot be the ones to make them happy. Tears spilled down Catherine's cheeks. When did you become so wise? I have my moments. Caleb reached out and carefully wiped a tear from her cheek with his thumb, the gesture achingly tender. I am not asking you to make any decisions right now, Catherine. I just wanted you to know how I feel. We can take all the time you need. Catherine leaned into his touch, her eyes closing. Thank you for understanding, for being patient with me. Always. They sat together on the porch until the stars came out, not touching but close enough that Catherine could feel the warmth of Caleb's body beside hers. When Thomas woke crying, they went back inside together, and Caleb held the baby while Catherine prepared to nurse him, and it felt natural and right in a way that both comforted and frightened Catherine. Over the next few weeks, the dynamic between Catherine and Caleb began to shift. It was subtle at first, small touches that lingered a moment longer than necessary, looks that held deeper meaning, conversations that grew more intimate and personal. Caleb told Catherine about his first love, a girl named Sarah who had married his older brother, and the pain of that betrayal that had driven him to leave Colorado. Catherine told Caleb about her fears for Thomas's future, how she worried about raising him alone, about whether she would be enough. You are more than enough, Caleb assured her. Thomas is lucky to have you as a mother. I want him to have a father, too, Catherine said quietly. Every boy needs a good man to look up to teach him how to be a man himself. Caleb met her eyes across the table, understanding the unspoken question in her words. He has that if you want him to. I would be honored to be a father to Thomas, Catherine. Not to replace his real father, but to be there for him, to raise him and teach him and love him. You would do that? I already love that boy, Caleb said simply. How could I not? He is part of you. Catherine's heart felt too big for her chest. She stood and moved around the table to where Caleb sat, and he turned his chair to face her, looking up with those steady gray eyes. Catherine cupped his face in her hands, feeling the scratch of his stubble against her palms, and leaned down to kiss him. It was soft and sweet, a tentative exploration, and when Catherine pulled back, Caleb was looking at her with such wonder that she had to kiss him again. Deeper this time. His arms came around her waist, pulling her closer, and Catherine threaded her fingers through his hair, losing herself in the sensation. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Caleb rested his forehead against hers. I have wanted to do that for weeks, he admitted. Why did you not? I did not want to rush you, did not want you to think I had expectations just because you lived here. I do not think that. I have never thought that. Catherine kissed him again, quick and light. I think I started falling for you the moment you caught me at your door. I just did not let myself acknowledge it. And now I am ready to stop fighting it. I want this, Caleb. I want us, if you will have me and Thomas, all our complicated baggage. I will have you both, baggage and all. Caleb stood and pulled her into a proper embrace, his arms strong and secure around her. Catherine rested her head on his chest, listening to the steady thump of his heart, and felt a sense of peace settle over her. This was right. This was home. They married in June, a simple ceremony in Fort Worth with Mrs. Fletcher and a few of Caleb's friends as witnesses. Catherine wore a dress she had sewn herself, pale blue cotton with white lace at the collar and cuffs, and Caleb wore his best suit, his hair neatly trimmed, and his boots polished. Thomas, now 3 months old and growing plump and healthy, slept through the entire ceremony in Mrs. Fletcher's arms. The preacher, a thin man with kind eyes, pronounced them husband and wife, and Caleb kissed Catherine with such tenderness it brought tears to her eyes. They signed the marriage certificate, Caleb's hand steady and Catherine slightly shaking, and then they were officially a family. They held a small celebration at the cabin afterward, with Mrs. Fletcher and Caleb's friend Jake, a fellow horse trainer, and his wife Margaret. There was cake and cider, laughter and music when Jake pulled out a fiddle and played cheerful tunes. Catherine danced with Caleb in the small space of the cabin, Thomas strapped to her chest in a sling, and she thought she had never been happier. When their guests finally left, and it was just the three of them, Caleb banked the fire and barred the door, then turned to Catherine with a nervous expression. "I have been thinking," he said, "about tonight." Catherine felt her cheeks heat. They had not discussed sleeping arrangements beyond the vague understanding that as a married couple they would share the bed. "What about it?" "I do not want you to feel pressured. I know we got married quickly, and you might not be ready for everything that entails. We can take our time." Catherine set Thomas in his cradle, making sure he was sleeping soundly, then turned back to Caleb. She crossed the room and took his hands in hers. "I am ready," she said softly. "I love you, Caleb. I want to be your wife in every way." The worry eased from Caleb's expression, replaced by love and desire. He pulled her close and kissed her, and Catherine melted into him, trusting him completely. They moved to the bed together, and Caleb made love to her with such gentleness and care it made Catherine cry. He was patient and attentive, making sure she was comfortable, that nothing hurt, that she was enjoying herself. It was different from being with Thomas, who had been young and enthusiastic, but not always skilled. Caleb was older and more experienced, and he took his time, learning what Catherine liked, what made her gasp and arch against him. Afterward, they lay tangled together in the narrow bed, Catherine's head on Caleb's chest, his arm around her shoulders. Thomas slept peacefully a few feet away, and the only sounds were their breathing and the gentle crackle of the fire. "I love you," Catherine whispered into the darkness. "I love you too," Caleb replied, kissing the top of her head. "Both of you." "My family." "Your family," Catherine echoed, smiling. It sounded perfect. Life settled into a new rhythm. Catherine and Caleb worked together to improve the cabin, adding shelves and a proper wardrobe, hanging curtains at the window that Catherine had sewn from fabric bought in town. Caleb's horse training business continued to do well, and he took on an apprentice, a young man named Peter, who was eager to learn and did not mind the hard work. This gave Caleb more time at home with Catherine and Thomas, and he spent his evenings playing with the baby, who had started smiling and laughing, his whole face lighting up when Caleb came through the door. "He loves you," Catherine said one evening, watching Caleb blow raspberries on Thomas's belly, making the baby shriek with laughter. "I love him too. He is a good boy." Caleb scooped Thomas up and lifted him high in the air, and Thomas laughed even harder, his tiny hands reaching for Caleb's face. "You are a good boy, are you not, Tommy?" "Yes, you are." Catherine felt her throat tighten with emotion. Thomas would never remember his biological father, but he would grow up with Caleb, and that was a gift beyond measure. Caleb was already more of a father to Thomas than many men were to their own children. In August, Catherine started feeling unwell. She was tired all the time, her breasts were tender, and the smell of bacon cooking made her nauseated. It took her almost 2 weeks to realize what was happening, and when she did, she sat down hard on the porch steps, her hand on her still flat stomach, overwhelmed with emotion. She was pregnant again. Caleb found her there 20 minutes later, tears streaming down her face. He knelt in front of her, alarmed. Catherine, what is wrong? Are you hurt? I am pregnant, she said, and watched his expression cycle through shock, confusion, and then pure joy. Pregnant? You are sure? I am sure the symptoms are the same as with Thomas. That is wonderful. Caleb pulled her into his arms, holding her tight. Another baby. We are going to have another baby. You are happy? Catherine asked, needing to hear him say it. I am thrilled. This baby will be ours, Catherine, yours and mine together. How could I not be happy? Catherine hugged him fiercely, relief washing through her. She had been afraid he might think it was too soon, that they were not ready, but of course Caleb would be happy. He always saw the best in every situation. I am happy too, she said, and a little scared. Thomas is only 6 months old. 2 babies so close together will be difficult. We will manage. We always do. Caleb pulled back and cupped her face in his hands. You are not alone this time, Catherine. You have me. We will do this together. Together, Catherine agreed and kissed him. She told Mrs. Fletcher the next week when the midwife came by to check on Thomas, who had a slight cough. Mrs. Fletcher examined Catherine and confirmed the pregnancy, estimating the baby would come in late March or early April. You are going to have your hands full with 2 little ones, Mrs. Fletcher said with a smile. But if anyone can manage it, you and Mr. Harrison can. You are a good team. We are, Catherine agreed, watching through the window as Caleb walked past, carrying Thomas, pointing out the horses and talking to him as though the baby could understand every word. We really are. The pregnancy progressed smoothly. Catherine felt better with this baby than she had with Thomas, perhaps because she was not dealing with grief and rejection and fear. She was safe and loved, with a husband who doted on her, and a home that was truly hers. Caleb worried over her constantly, insisting she rest more, not lift anything heavy, not work too hard. Catherine tolerated his hovering with amused patience, knowing it came from a place of love. Thomas grew rapidly, learning to sit up and then crawl, getting into everything. He was a curious, active baby, and Catherine spent her days chasing after him, making sure he did not get into the fireplace or pull down the contents of the shelves. Caleb baby proofed the cabin as much as possible, but Thomas was resourceful and determined. In November, Caleb came home one evening with news. The Jameson property is officially for sale. The widow is asking $800 for 120 acres, including the small house and barn. It borders our land on the east side. Catherine looked up from where she was nursing Thomas, who was stubbornly refusing to be weaned despite his mother's growing belly. That is a good price for that much land. Can we afford it? If we are careful, yes. I have been saving every extra dollar, and I have a good contract coming up with a rancher who wants me to train 10 horses over the winter. That will bring in $500 right there. With what I have saved, we would have enough for the down payment and still have some left over for expenses. Then we should do it, Catherine said decisively. More land means more space for the horses, and eventually we could use that house when the children are older, or rent it out for extra income. Children, plural, Caleb said with a grin, coming to sit beside her. He rested his hand on her belly, which was now noticeably rounded. I like the sound of that. I was thinking, Catherine said carefully, that after this baby is born, maybe we should wait a while before having more. I would like to space them out a bit more than Thomas, and this one are. That is fine with me. Whatever you want, Catherine. You are the one doing all the hard work. Catherine smiled and leaned into him. Not all of it. You do plenty. Caleb bought the Jameson property in December, signing the papers in Fort Worth with Catherine beside him. It was exciting and terrifying in equal measure, suddenly owning so much land. They walked the property together on a clear winter day, Thomas bundled against Catherine's chest, examining the fences and the small house, which was in decent condition but would need some repairs. We could rent this out to Peter, Caleb suggested, referring to his apprentice. He has been talking about wanting to move out of his parents' house, and the rent would help pay off the mortgage faster. That is a good idea. He is a hard worker, and it would be nice having someone close by in case of emergencies. They spent the rest of the day planning and dreaming, talking about buying more horses, maybe even some cattle, about building a bigger barn and repairing the fences. It was hard work ahead, but they were both excited about the future. Catherine's second pregnancy was easier than her first in some ways, harder in others. She knew what to expect this time, which reduced her anxiety, but chasing after an active 1-year-old while heavily pregnant was exhausting. Thomas was walking now, toddling around the cabin and getting into everything, and he seemed to sense that something was different about his mother. He became clingy and demanding, wanting to be held constantly, crying when Catherine could not pick him up because her belly was too big. Caleb stepped in, spending more time with Thomas, taking him out to the barn to see the horses, letting him help with chores. Father and son bonded deeply during this time, and Catherine would often find them together, Thomas chattering away in his baby language and Caleb responding as though he understood perfectly. In late March, Catherine went into labor. This time they were prepared. Mrs. Fletcher arrived within an hour, and Caleb had a neighbor woman, Mrs. Sarah Davis, come to watch Thomas. The labor was shorter than with Thomas, only about 6 hours, and while it was still painful and exhausting, Catherine felt more in control, more confident. Their daughter was born just after dawn, as the sun was painting the eastern sky pink and gold. She was tiny, barely 5 pounds, with a dusting of blonde hair and blue eyes that Catherine knew might change color. She cried lustily, her little face scrunched up in indignation, and Catherine fell in love instantly. "A daughter," Caleb breathed, staring at the baby in awe. "We have a daughter." "What should we name her?" Catherine asked, already knowing what she wanted but wanting Caleb's input. "What about Rose? She is as beautiful and delicate as a rose." "Rose Harrison," Catherine said, testing it out. "I like it, but I want to add a middle name, Rose Eleanor, after my mother. Rose Eleanor Harrison. It is perfect." Caleb held his daughter, his large hands so gentle with the fragile bundle, and Catherine saw tears in his eyes. "She is perfect," he whispered. "You are perfect. Thank you, Catherine, for giving me this family. I never thought I would have this, and now I have everything." "We have everything," Catherine corrected, reaching for his hand. "Together." Thomas was introduced to his baby sister later that morning. At first he was suspicious, staring at the tiny creature in his mother's arms with a furrowed brow. But when Rose opened her eyes and looked at him, Thomas's expression softened. He reached out one chubby finger and gently touched her hand, and Rose's tiny fingers wrapped around his in instinct. Thomas looked up at Catherine and Caleb with a huge smile. "Baby," he said clearly, one of his few words. "My baby." "Your sister," Catherine confirmed. "You have to be gentle with her, Thomas. She is very small." Thomas nodded seriously, as though he understood completely, and from that moment on, he was fiercely protective of his little sister. He would sit beside Catherine while she nursed Rose, patting the baby's head gently, singing her nonsensical songs in his toddler voice. At night, if Rose cried, Thomas would wake up and call out, "Baby crying," until Caleb or Catherine went to tend to her. Life with 2 children was chaotic and exhausting and wonderful. Catherine felt like she was constantly feeding someone, changing diapers, washing clothes, cooking meals, but she had never been happier. Caleb helped with everything, getting up in the night to bring Rose to Catherine for nursing, playing with Thomas while Catherine bathed the baby, cooking dinner when Catherine was too tired. They were a team in every sense of the word, partners in building a life together. The summer of 1885 was hot and dry, and Caleb worked long hours expanding his business. He hired 2 more apprentices and built a second corral and a larger barn on the new property. Money was still tight, but they were making it work. Catherine sewed clothes for other people in town, bringing in a bit of extra income, and she sold eggs from the chickens Caleb had bought her in the spring. In October, a woman came to the door. She was thin and gray, her face lined with age and hardship, and it took Katherine a moment to recognize her. Agnes Winters, her former mother-in-law. Catherine's first instinct was to slam the door in the woman's face, but something in Agnes's expression, a brokenness that had not been there before, made her hesitate. "What do you want?" Katherine asked coldly. "I came to see my grandson," Agnes said, her voice trembling. "Please, I know I do not deserve it, but I need to see him. Just once." Katherine should have said no. This woman had thrown her out in a blizzard, called her terrible names, refused to believe her own grandchild was her blood. But Katherine looked at Agnes and saw only a sad, lonely old woman who had destroyed her relationship with her family through her own bitterness and pride. "Wait here," Katherine said. She went inside and found Caleb, who was playing with Thomas and Rose on a blanket on the floor. She explained who was outside, and Caleb's expression darkened. "You do not have to let her see him," Caleb said flatly. "After what she did to you, she has no right." "I know, but she is still Thomas's grandmother, and she has already lost her son. If I turn her away now, she will have lost everyone. I do not want to be cruel like she was." Caleb studied her for a long moment, then nodded. "You are a better person than I am, Katherine Harrison, but I am staying right here. If she says one unkind word to you or the children, she is gone." Katherine brought Agnes inside. The older woman's eyes immediately went to Thomas, who was now almost 2 years old, a sturdy toddler with dark hair and his father's brown eyes. Agnes's face crumpled. "He looks just like Thomas did at that age," she whispered. "Oh, my boy, my sweet boy." "His name is Thomas Caleb," Katherine said. "Thomas after his father. Caleb after the man who saved us and who is raising him as his own son." Agnes flinched but nodded. She looked at Caleb, who was standing with his arms crossed, his expression hard. "Thank you," she said quietly, "for taking care of them, for being a better person than I was." "I did what any decent person would do," Caleb said. "What you should have done." "I know." Agnes looked back at Katherine, tears streaming down her weathered face. "I was wrong. About everything. I was grieving and angry, and I took it out on you. I convinced myself that Thomas could not be my grandchild because I could not bear the thought of raising another baby at my age. So I told myself lies until I believed them. I threw you out to die because I was a coward. I have lived with that guilt every day since." Katherine felt her anger begin to soften. She understood grief, how it could twist you up inside and make you do things you would never normally do. "Why did you come now after all this time?" "Because I am dying," Agnes said simply. "Cancer. The doctor says I have maybe 6 months. I could not die without at least trying to apologize, to see my grandson one last time. I am not asking for forgiveness. I know I do not deserve that. I just needed you to know that I was wrong and I am sorry." Thomas had toddled over during this conversation, curious about the crying stranger. He looked up at Agnes with his bright, inquisitive eyes. "Why sad?" he asked. Agnes let out a choked laugh. "I am sad because I missed so much of your life, little one. But I am happy to see you now. You are beautiful and perfect." Thomas, with the easy affection of a toddler who had been raised in love, patted Agnes's knee comfortingly. "No sad," he said firmly. Agnes broke down completely, sobbing into her hands. Katherine exchanged a look with Caleb, and he gave a small nod. Katherine sighed and moved to sit beside her former mother-in-law, awkwardly patting her shoulder. "I forgive you," Katherine said quietly. "Not because you deserve it, but because holding on to anger will not change what happened. You were cruel to me when I needed kindness, and I will never forget that. But I do not want to carry hatred in my heart. It is too heavy." Agnes looked up, her face blotchy and tear-stained. You are too kind. After everything I did, I am not doing it for you. I am doing it for me and for Thomas. He should know his grandmother, even if only for a little while. Over the next few months, Agnes became a somewhat regular visitor. She would come once a week, bringing small gifts for the children, sitting and watching them play. She was tentative and careful, clearly afraid of overstepping, and she went out of her way to be polite to both Catherine and Caleb. She told Thomas stories about his father, about what kind of boy he had been, and Catherine appreciated that. Thomas would never have his own memories of his biological father, but at least he would have stories. Agnes died in January of 1886 in her sleep, peacefully according to the doctor. Catherine and Caleb attended the funeral with Thomas, who did not quite understand what was happening, but knew everyone was sad. Agnes had left a will, and to Catherine's shock, she had left everything to Thomas, the ranch house, the land, several $100s in savings. It was not a fortune, but it was substantial. She wanted you to have it, the lawyer explained. She said it was your son's birthright, and she was sorry she tried to keep it from him. Catherine cried at the news, a complicated mix of emotions. She grieved for Agnes, for the relationship they could have had if not for pride and pain. But she was also grateful that in the end, Agnes had tried to make things right. They sold the ranch to a neighboring family and added the money to their savings. With the extra funds, Caleb was able to pay off the mortgage on the Jameson property and invest in better equipment for training horses. Their business continued to grow, and by the summer of 1886, they were doing well enough that Caleb was able to hire a permanent employee, Peter, who had been his apprentice and was now a skilled trainer in his own right. Thomas started showing an interest in the horses, toddling after his father to the barn, wanting to help with everything. Caleb was patient with him, letting him hand over brushes and hold lead ropes, teaching him how to be gentle and calm around the animals. Rose was still too young for the barn, but she was a cheerful, happy baby who rarely cried and seemed content to watch the world from her mother's arms. In the fall of 1886, Catherine realized she was pregnant again. This time, the news was met with pure joy and no fear. They were established now, secure in their home and their business. A third child felt like a blessing rather than a burden. Boy or girl, what do you think? Caleb asked one evening, his hand on Catherine's still flat stomach. I do not know. What do you want? Healthy, Caleb said immediately. That is all that matters. But if I had to choose, maybe another boy? Thomas could use a brother. Catherine laughed. We will take what we get and be grateful. Their third child, a boy they named Caleb Daniel Harrison, was born in May of 1887. He was a big baby, nearly 8 pounds, with a shock of black hair and his father's gray eyes. Thomas, now 4 years old, was thrilled to have a little brother, and Rose, just over 2, was more interested in her dolls than the baby, but tolerated him with good grace. Life continued its steady rhythm. The children grew, the business prospered, and Catherine and Caleb's love deepened with each passing year. They were not wealthy by any means, but they were comfortable, and more importantly, they were happy. They had built something real together, a family and a life that felt solid and true. On a warm summer evening in 1889, Catherine stood on the porch of their cabin watching the sunset. Thomas, now 6, was in the corral with Caleb, learning to ride on a gentle mare. Rose, 4, was chasing fireflies in the yard, her laughter bright and clear. Baby Daniel, too, was asleep on Catherine's shoulder, his head heavy and warm against her neck. She was pregnant again, due in the winter, and this time she was hoping for another girl to even out the numbers. Caleb looked over from the corral and caught her eye, and the smile he gave her was full of love and contentment. Catherine smiled back, her heart full to bursting. She thought about that night 6 years ago when she had stumbled through a blizzard, certain she was going to die, and then this man had opened his door and changed her entire life. She had lost so much: her parents, her first husband, the life she had thought she would have. But she had gained so much more. She had Caleb, who loved her with a steadiness that never wavered. She had her children, each one a miracle and a joy. She had a home, a real home, filled with laughter and love and the everyday chaos of family life. "Mama, look," Rose called, running up to the porch with a firefly cupped in her hands. "I caught one." "That is wonderful, sweetheart," Katherine said, bending down to admire the glowing insect. "Now let it go so it can find its family." Rose opened her hands, and the firefly flew away, its light blinking as it disappeared into the twilight. Rose watched it go, then threw her arms around Catherine's legs in a fierce hug. "I love you, Mama," she said. "I love you too, baby girl, so very much." Caleb finished with Thomas, and they walked back to the cabin together, Thomas chattering excitedly about how he had trotted without holding on to the saddle horn. Caleb's arm went around Catherine's waist, pulling her close, and she leaned into him, breathing in the familiar scent of horses and hay and him. "Happy?" he murmured into her hair. "So happy," Katherine said. "Sometimes I still cannot believe this is my life." "Believe it. You deserve all of this and more." They went inside together, the whole family, and Katherine set about making dinner while Caleb got the children washed up. They ate around the small table, cramped now with 5 people, and talked about their day. Thomas wanted to know when he could ride by himself. Rose wanted a kitten. Daniel smeared mashed potatoes in his hair and thought it was hilarious. It was loud and messy and perfect. After dinner, Caleb read to the children while Katherine cleaned up. She listened to his deep voice telling a story about a brave knight and a dragon, heard her children's laughter and excited questions, and felt a wave of gratitude so strong it made her eyes sting with tears. This was everything she had ever wanted, everything she had never dared to hope for after that terrible night in the blizzard. When the children were finally in bed, tucked into the loft that Caleb had built when Thomas outgrew the cradle, Katherine and Caleb sat together on the porch in the cool evening air. The stars were bright overhead, and somewhere in the distance a coyote sang its lonely song. "I got a letter today," Caleb said, "from my brother in Colorado." Katherine sat up, surprised. Caleb had not heard from his brother in years, not since he had left Colorado. "What did he say?" "He wants to reconcile. Said he has been thinking about how we left things, and he regrets how he treated me. He invited us to visit to meet his children." Caleb was quiet for a moment. "I am not sure how I feel about it." "What do you want to do?" "Part of me wants to tell him to go to hell. He made my life miserable, and I do not owe him anything. But another part of me thinks about our children, how they have aunts and uncles and cousins they have never met. Family is important. You know that better than anyone." Katherine took his hand, threading her fingers through his. "I think you should do what feels right to you. If you want to reconnect with your brother, I will support you. If you want to leave the past in the past, I will support that too. There is no wrong answer." Caleb squeezed her hand. "I think I would like to try. Not for him, but for our children. And maybe for the man I used to be, who loved his brother before everything went wrong. Then we will go to Colorado. When the baby is old enough to travel, we will take a trip and meet your family." "Our family," Caleb corrected, pulling her close. "Thank you, Katherine, for everything, for loving me, for giving me this life. I did not know it was possible to be this happy." "I did not either," Katherine said, "but we found it together. We found each other." They sat together under the stars, two people who had been broken and lost, who had found each other in the middle of a storm and built something beautiful from the wreckage of their pasts. Their story was not perfect or easy, but it was real and it was theirs. Inside the cabin, their children slept peacefully, safe and loved. Outside, the Texas night sang with crickets and frogs, with the whisper of wind through prairie grass. And on the porch, Katherine and Caleb held each other close, grateful for every moment, every breath, every heartbeat that had led them to this place. Katherine thought about the woman she had been 6 years ago, desperate and afraid, stumbling through the snow with nothing but hope and determination keeping her alive. That woman had been strong, but she had also been alone. Now Katherine was stronger still, because she had Caleb beside her, because she had her children, because she had learned that true strength came not from standing alone, but from having people to stand with you. She thought about Thomas, her first husband, and sent up a silent thank you. Thank you for loving me. Thank you for giving me our son. I hope you are at peace wherever you are. I hope you know that Thomas Caleb is growing up good and strong, that he will know about you, that he will carry your name with pride. And then she let the past go, releasing it into the night like Rose had released her firefly, and turned her attention fully to the present, to the man beside her and the life they were building together. Their fourth child, a daughter they named Grace Katherine Harrison, was born in December of 1889. She was a calm, peaceful baby, and Katherine joked that she was making up for how difficult Daniel had been. They now had 4 children under the age of 7, and the cabin was bursting at the seams. Caleb started making plans to build a proper house on the Jameson property, something bigger with separate bedrooms for the children. In the spring of 1890, they made the trip to Colorado to visit Caleb's brother. It was a long journey by wagon, over a week of travel, but the children thought it was an adventure. They camped under the stars and saw new places, and Katherine watched Caleb grow both nervous and excited as they drew closer to his childhood home. The reunion with his brother was awkward at first, years of hurt and resentment not easily overcome. But Caleb's brother, Christopher, was sincere in his apology, and his wife, Sarah, the woman who had chosen Christopher over Caleb all those years ago, was kind and welcoming to Katherine and the children. They had 3 children of their own, and the cousins hit it off immediately, running wild around the ranch while the adults talked. By the end of the visit, some of the old wounds had begun to heal. Caleb and Christopher would never be as close as they had been as boys, but they could at least be brothers again, could share letters and occasional visits. It was enough. They returned to Texas in late spring, and Caleb threw himself into building the new house. With the help of Peter and several hired men from town, the house went up quickly. It was a simple 2-story structure with 4 bedrooms, a large kitchen, and a sitting room. To Katherine, who had grown up in a tiny apartment in town and spent the last several years in a 1-room cabin, it felt like a mansion. They moved in July, and Katherine cried as she walked through the empty rooms, imagining how they would fill them with furniture and memories. The children were ecstatic, each one getting their own bedroom for the first time in their lives. Thomas and Daniel would share 1 room, Rose and Grace another, leaving 2 spare rooms for future children or guests. "Do you like it?" Caleb asked anxiously, watching Katherine explore. "I love it," Katherine said, turning to him with tears streaming down her face. "It is perfect, Caleb. More than I ever dreamed of. You deserve it. You deserve everything." He pulled her into his arms and kissed her, and Katherine kissed him back, pouring all her love and gratitude into the embrace. They christened the house by making love in their new bedroom, the first time they had ever had a door to close and true privacy. It felt decadent and wonderful, and afterward they lay tangled together in the big bed Caleb had built, listening to their children playing downstairs, and talked about the future. "Do you want more children?" Caleb asked, his hand resting on Katherine's stomach. "I do not know," Katherine said honestly. 4 is a lot already, but I am only 28. We could have several more if we are not careful. I will leave it up to you. I am happy with the family we have, but I would not mind more either. As many as you want to give me." Katherine smiled and kissed him. "Let us just see what happens. No more planning. We will let life surprise us." Life did surprise them. Katherine had 2 more children over the next 5 years, both boys. William Matthew Harrison in 1892 and Benjamin James Harrison in 1894. 6 children, ranging in age from infant to 13, made for a chaotic household. But it was a happy chaos, full of laughter and love and the everyday challenges of raising a large family. Thomas grew into a responsible young man who loved working with the horses as much as his father did. He was patient and gentle, with a natural gift for understanding animals. Caleb began training him seriously when he turned 12, teaching him everything he knew about breaking and training horses. Rose was artistic and dreamy, always drawing or making up stories, and Catherine encouraged her talent, buying her paper and pencils whenever she could afford them. Daniel was rough and tumble, always getting into scrapes, but with a heart of gold. Grace was quiet and thoughtful, a reader like her father. William was curious about everything, constantly asking questions, and Benjamin, the baby, was spoiled by his older siblings, but somehow not ruined by it. The horse training business continued to thrive. Caleb's reputation spread throughout Texas, and people came from as far as San Antonio and Dallas to have him train their horses. He employed 5 men full-time, and during the busy season, he took on additional help. Money was no longer tight. They were not rich, but they were comfortable, and they had everything they needed. In 1896, when Catherine was 34 and Caleb was 38, they decided their family was complete. 6 children were more than enough, and Catherine's body was tired from years of pregnancy and childbirth. They took precautions to prevent more pregnancies, and for the first time in over a decade, Catherine did not have to worry about being pregnant or caring for an infant. It felt strange and liberating at the same time. Her children were growing up. Thomas was 14 and working alongside his father as an equal partner. Rose was 11 and talking about maybe becoming a teacher someday. Daniel was 9 and already showing signs of being as tall as his father. Grace was 7 and had just learned to read. William was 4 and following Daniel everywhere. Benjamin was 2 and still her baby, though not for much longer. Catherine found herself with more time, and she used it to pursue her own interests. She improved her sewing skills and started making more elaborate clothes, not just for her family but to sell in town. Her reputation grew, and soon she had more orders than she could fill. She hired 2 young women from town to help her, turning part of the house into a small sewing shop. The extra income was nice, but more than that, Catherine enjoyed having something that was just hers, a skill and a business separate from her role as wife and mother. The years passed peacefully. There were challenges, of course. A drought one summer that killed half their grazing grass and forced them to buy expensive hay. A winter when influenza swept through the household and they were all sick for weeks. The time Daniel broke his arm, falling from a horse, and Catherine thought she might die from worry before the doctor set the bone. But these were the normal struggles of life, and they faced them together as a family. Thomas turned 18 in 1893, a young man now rather than a boy. He had grown tall and broad-shouldered like Caleb, with his birth father's dark coloring, but Caleb's steady gray eyes. He was handsome and capable, and Catherine watched with pride and a touch of sadness as he began courting a girl from town, a sweet-faced young woman named Emma Harper. "He is going to get married and leave us," Catherine said to Caleb one night, watching Thomas and Emma sit together on the porch, talking quietly. "He is growing up." "That is what children do," Caleb said, but his voice was tinged with the same sadness Catherine felt. "I know. I just was not prepared for how fast it would happen. It feels like just yesterday he was a baby in my arms and now he is a man. He is a good man. We raised him well, Catherine. You should be proud." "I am proud. I am so proud of all of them." Catherine leaned against Caleb, taking comfort in his solid presence. "I just wish they could stay little forever." "If they stayed little forever, we would never get grandchildren," Caleb pointed out. "And I have to admit, I am looking forward to being a grandfather. All the fun of babies without the sleepless nights." Catherine laughed. "You have a point." Thomas and Emma married in the spring of 1894. A beautiful ceremony in the church in Fort Worth. Catherine cried through the entire thing, watching her firstborn son pledge his life to this girl, so young and in love and full of hope. Thomas and Emma moved into the old cabin, which Caleb had maintained over the years, and Thomas continued working with the horses while Emma started a vegetable garden. Exactly 9 months after the wedding, Catherine became a grandmother for the first time. Thomas and Emma's son, named William Thomas Harrison, after both his grandfathers, was born in February of 1895. Catherine held her grandson for the first time and felt her heart expand in ways she had not known were possible. She had thought she could not love anyone more than she loved her own children, but this tiny baby, her son's son, was equally precious. "I am a grandmother," she said to Caleb that evening, still marveling at it. "When did we get old enough to be grandparents?" "Speak for yourself. I am not old. I am distinguished," Caleb said, but he was grinning, clearly as delighted with his grandson as Catherine was. The years continued their steady march. More grandchildren arrived. Emma and Thomas had two more children, daughters they named Catherine and Rose after their grandmothers. Daniel, at 16, was already making eyes at the blacksmith's daughter. Rose had indeed become a teacher, taking a position at the school in Fort Worth. Grace was turning into a beauty, with her blonde hair and Caleb's gray eyes. William and Benjamin were still young, but growing fast, racing toward adulthood. In the summer of 1900, Catherine turned 38 and took stock of her life. She had been married to Caleb for 16 years, and they had built something extraordinary together. Their family was large and loving, their business successful, their home warm and welcoming. She had survived loss and hardship and come out the other side stronger and happier than she had ever imagined possible. One evening, she and Caleb took a walk together, something they tried to do whenever they could steal a few moments of quiet. They walked hand in hand through the pastures, watching the horses graze in the golden evening light, and talked about everything and nothing. "Do you ever regret it?" Catherine asked, "taking me in that night? You could have had a much simpler life if you had turned me away." "Never," Caleb said firmly. "Not for a single moment. You and the children are the best thing that ever happened to me, Catherine. I was half alive before you stumbled into my life, just going through the motions. You made everything real, gave me a purpose beyond just surviving. I would do it all again in a heartbeat." "I love you so much," Catherine said, stopping to face him. "I do not think I tell you that enough, but I do. I love you more than I can express. I know. And I love you just as much." Caleb cupped her face in his hands, those large, gentle hands that had caught her when she fell, that had delivered their daughter, that had built them a home. "We have had a good life, Catherine Harrison. A beautiful life." "We have," Catherine agreed. "And it is not over yet. We have years ahead of us still, God willing. More grandchildren to spoil, more memories to make. Then let us make them count," Caleb said, and kissed her as the sun set over the Texas prairie, painting the sky in shades of gold and red and purple. They walked back to the house together as the stars began to appear overhead, the same stars that had watched over Catherine the night she had been cast out into the storm, the same stars that had witnessed every joy and sorrow of their life together. The house was lit from within, warm light spilling from the windows, and Catherine could see the shapes of her children moving around inside, hear the faint sound of laughter and conversation. This was home. This was family. This was everything she had ever wanted and more than she had ever dared to dream. And it had all started with a cowboy who had opened his door to a desperate pregnant stranger and changed both their lives forever. Catherine took Caleb's hand, and they walked into their home together, into the warmth and light and love, ready for whatever the future might bring, knowing that as long as they had each other, they could face anything. And they lived happily, surrounded by love and family, for many long years to come.